This episode is brought to you by Sax.com. At Sax.com, it's easy to find your new vibe. Dive into the Western trend with gold cowboy boots from Stott, or go full 90s throwback with platforms from Prada. You can shop for everything on your agenda, whether it's a breezy Zimmermann dress for a garden party or a bright Chloe blazer for brunch. Find inspiration for your new vibe every day at Sax.com.
It's the first spring graduation season since Nevada passed a law allowing students to decorate their grad caps and their robes with religious or cultural regalia. But somehow the practice is still controversial. Earlier this month, Eldorado High School told a student she couldn't wear a stole honoring her family's heritage, only to reverse course. Today on CityCast Las Vegas, we revisit a conversation with Dr. Sheila Bock. She's a folklorist at UNLV, and she explains how grad garb got so contentious and what happens when students use robes and mortarboards as a form of expression. It's Wednesday, May 15th. I'm Dayvid Figler. Here's what Las Vegas is talking about. Dr. Sheila Bock, welcome to CityCast Las Vegas.
Oh, it's so good to be here.
Well, glad to have you, especially as graduation is looming for a lot of people in our valley. I want to ask you, we see a lot of graduates these days with very personalized, adorned caps. And before I ask the reason why grads would want to do this, I want to ask, why do you think that schools or universities or even fellow students might be against their fellow students doing it?
Okay, well, that's a good question. Part of the pushback against it is based in the idea that the graduation ceremony or the commencement ceremony is this formal celebratory occasion that is meant to mark achievements not only for the individual graduates, but for the community or the group of graduates as a whole. So oftentimes the pushback takes the shape of ideas about the value of uniformity, right? And the value of the graduation ceremony as being a space where a community of graduates is being performed, not just the individual accomplishment.
Now, you said uniformity. I hear that sometimes as conformity.
Mm-hmm.
And since schools are kind of an institution, I guess those go hand in hand sometimes.
Yes, it does, right? And one of the things that I've looked at in my research is, when we think about the commencement ritual, right? It is very much the scripted space, right? Where people have very particular ways they're supposed to dress, very particular ways they're supposed to move. And, there's very particular kind of choreographies within this space or even uses of space in terms of who's allowed to sit where, how long people are allowed to be on the stage. But a lot of times when people enter this space of commencement, they want to use it as a place, as an opportunity to bring their whole selves right into this educational setting that they haven't necessarily felt that these aspects of themselves have been inherently valued, right, by the institution.
Yeah. I'm sure there's all sorts of people who are out there who are the first to graduate in their family, and this is
Absolutely.
Even more significant than others. What other sorts of expressions are we talking about on graduation caps that you've noted in your research and studies?
So we see, language integrated into the caps. We see images integrated into the caps, for example, of family members, friends, even pets. Kind of early on in the research, I interviewed a student who incorporated the marigolds that are a really important component of the Day of the Dead celebrations into the design of her cap. So she actually used real marigolds in order to commemorate the loss of her grandfather who had passed away the year before. Sometimes these, decorations and the meanings that they're meant to communicate are very explicit, right? Like one that says like, beware bad hombre with degree, right? So that's like very explicitly kind of a reference to, the rhetoric of Donald Trump, right? And this idea of the bad hombre is something that's supposed to be, scary and threatening. And sometimes it's more implicit, right? And it's something that is meant to, be meaningful for the individual, but not inherently or as overtly legible to other people who will see it.
I mean, have you seen any that are particularly maybe over the top funny or trying to be funny? I guess it doesn't always work.
I mean, there are so many that are hilarious, right? So one of my favorite ones is kind of this 3D rendering that stands like 8 inches tall, right? 6 to 8 inches tall of the character Patrick, right? From SpongeBob SquarePants, right?
Sure. I won't do my impression. I'll save you. But yeah.
Oh, no, I would love to hear your
He's kind of the big oafy sidekick, right?
Yes, right? So there's this kind of a large pink, Patrick on the top of the cap, and he's holding $3, right? And this is a reference to a kind of a popular meme that was circulating around that time. And this was the I have $3 meme. Are you familiar with it?
Yeah. It's basically I'm broke ass poor. Like this is all I got. Yeah.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it was this, wonderful cap that was hilarious for
I could see
so
that for
many
a grad
reasons.
student for sure.
Yeah, I mean, this was an undergrad, so we'll do it that way you will. But I mean, that was a theme that I saw in a lot of the caps, right? Of excessive debt, right? Financial hardship.
Yeah.
But oftentimes these kind of very serious ideas, right? And very serious concerns were being communicated kind of through this lens of humor. For a lot of the people who decorate their caps, it's not always to communicate something so, capital M meaningful, right? Oftentimes they're just meant to be, silly, playful, but
celebratory,
but I find, if we're seeing these patterns, right, across several graduates or across many graduates, across many institutions, it's telling us something. There's a there that's worth looking into a little bit more.
Well, I guess I have to take the bait. What is the meaning then? What do you think is there?
Yeah. And so, first thinking about the practicality of it, right? So a lot of people have brought that up as one of the reasons why they've chosen to decorate their caps, right? Because they want to stand out in the crowd in some way. For the individual, they become these sites of personal expression, right? So people literally approach their caps as this blank canvas that they can kind of put their own stamp on. At the same time, these caps are very much in conversation with these more widely circulating attitudes about what it means to get a college education, right? And what's valuable about it. And so I am really interested in how kind of this personal and the larger than personal are in conversation with each other and how that takes shape in these caps in this particular moment that has kind of heightened cultural significance.
This episode is brought to you by Saks.com. At Saks.com, it's easy to find your new vibe. Dive into the Western trend with gold cowboy boots from Stott, or go full 90s throwback with platforms from Prada. You can shop for everything on your agenda, whether it's a breezy Zimmermann dress for a garden party or a bright Chloe blazer for brunch. Find inspiration for your new vibe every day at Saks.com.
I really do appreciate the cultural stuff, especially with certain groups that might consider themselves to have been marginalized, as you describe in the bigger academic setting, like, what about me? What about these things? But I'm wondering if people are taking this opportunity, especially in the present day, to express themselves politically, which is interesting, but it also seems to maybe open the door for more controversial or harmful expression that could be on grad caps or regalia too. So I guess the question is, do schools need to develop exclusion lists for things like, I don't know, hate speech or too controversial political opinions on graduation outfits?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question. I think that there might be. One of the things that I actually found really surprising, right, is when I kind of really started delving into grad caps in 2016. And I was very much expecting there to be a lot more overtly direct references to the 2016 presidential election, right? That there's some, but I was really surprised to find that folks were not doing that, at least in the examples that I found, or not nearly as much as I was anticipating, given how strong people's feelings were, right, in relation to that election. So I get the feeling that a lot of the times, people will use their caps to communicate very political messaging, right? But oftentimes those political messages are also communicated kind of in relation to people's own perspectives on what's the goal of this event. So
Mm-hmm.
I just want to give one example of somebody that I interviewed, I believe in 2017. She is an immigrant rights activist, and she had decorated her cap with the words, "Love has no borders." Right. So it was a very beautifully decorated cap that she had decorated herself. She said, very early on, if you had asked me about 6 months ago, I was completely ready to put on my cap, "Fuck ICE." And she had plans. She was talking to family members or her sister about lighting it up to really have it stand out. And then, as it came closer to graduation, she decided not to do that for various reasons, right? So one reason was like her mom wouldn't like it. But, she said, "You know what, though? My mom eventually would have gotten over that because my mom knows me, right?
Right.
She would have been okay with it." But she went on to explain how this was a day where that it was really about her accomplishment. And as she was thinking about it, she found that if she were to put that message, "Fuck ICE," on there, it would kind of be taking away from her good feelings about the day.
Yeah.
Um,
So
and
really
so
self-regulating there.
yeah, but to answer your question as well, I mean, I do anticipate it's very possible, right? Like as we see, like, wholly problematic things, right? Like, swastikas or slurs or things along those lines, right? I mean, I think that there will need to be, hard and fast rules to say that this is not a space where that's acceptable.
Yeah, especially as it becomes more common. And I think that high schools are kind of the last on the bandwagon. It traditionally, especially here in Nevada, there's been a lot of pushback. And we've seen petitions and protests by
Hmm.
high school students saying, we want to be able to express ourselves. Do you think that high schools should loosen up a little bit when it comes to the same sort of expressions that we see in the college space? Not just on caps, but maybe even whole graduation outfits.
Mm. I mean, I would say yes, because oftentimes, the idea that's put forward is that, that there's a kind of a sanctity to the tradition, right, of the uniform graduation dress. But, anyone who really studies tradition knows that, tradition is something that kind of is manufactured. So not everything has happened from time immemorial, right? So tradition is an interpretation of the past and the present, right? And when we label something as traditional, we're making kind of a rhetorical gesture towards it. And so, when you're doing that, oftentimes, not always, but often, that rhetorical gesture is meant to create boundaries around something, right? And often that will be more inclusive of some communities than others. At the same time, anyone who pays close attention to tradition knows that in order for it to be sustainable and viable, it needs to adapt. Like traditions are very rarely look exactly the same, over the course of time. They adapt according to the people who are engaging in them, and they need to be responsive to the needs of the folks who are engaging in the traditional practices. So I think that if there is a desire, right, amongst the graduates, right, to communicate and make visible different aspects of themselves. I think it really behooves the people in charge to take that desire very seriously.
But I'm wondering, is there a point at which the personalization of graduation wear just goes too far?
Potentially. What are some examples that you're thinking of when you think too far?
Well, where it just becomes chaos, like college grads who are advertising only their OnlyFans account on the top of their cap, or maybe even unfortunate political back and forth. Someone might have a BLM on theirs, and someone sees that, and next to them they decide to woke people suck or something like that, and it just becomes a little confrontational. Ugh.
Yeah.
Oh, my
Yeah.
mind goes to dark places.
Sure. No. And I mean, I don't blame you, right? I mean, you've been living, in this country for the last, several years, right? So
I try to be sleepwalking through it, but yeah, no, it's hard not to. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. And, I haven't seen those types of conflicts. It's not to say that they will not happen, but that's not something that has emerged in the research that I've done so far. And this is a tradition that's been around for a pretty long time.
As high schools and universities are preparing for graduations in the coming weeks, what do personalized graduation regalia do for the graduation ceremony, in your opinion?
Oh, that's a good question. So for me, I really see it as functioning very similarly. And stay with me here on this connection because, I promise it's going to make sense. But
I'm along for the ride.
okay, yeah. So, when you think back on these, medieval ecclesiastical texts, right, that were written in the 12th to 15th century, right? If you look at them, they were written by, scribes, people who would write in them. And what's wonderful about them is the people who would write these kind of very kind of sacred texts, they would draw all kinds of marginalia in the margins, right? And they would draw these pictures that were very much kind of subversive and kind of pushing back against the sanctity of the text, but it became a part of the text. And for a really long time, people who would study these texts would look at that marginalia, right? These pictures and these things that would be in the margin, and they would say, "Oh, it doesn't really matter. They're just trivial. It's kind of secondary to the real point of the text." And there have since been medieval historians who've looked at that and said, "No, these are actually tells us a lot about how people were engaging with this text at the time, right?" And so I think that, we can liken people decorating their caps to those folks who would, inscribe this subversive marginalia, right, into the sacred text of these medieval ecclesiastical texts, in that they are kind of putting their own stamp, their own interpretation on it, right? They're disrupting the irreverence that they're supposed to have with it, right? Without completely upending it, right? They're still writing kind of what they're supposed to in the text itself. And so, I mean, I think that is really valuable, right?
The Vandals will have their revenge on history yet.
Yes, absolutely. And,
I love that.
And I'm a folklorist, right? And so that means that, I'm really compelled by the creative ways that people use these often like trivialized forms of expression to create and communicate meanings in their lives, right? And I think that these decorated mortarboards are such perfect examples of something that is so quote unquote trivial, but that really can tell us a lot, right, about people's experiences with and perspectives on the value of higher education. And I think that those are really big conversations, important conversations that are taking shape in these trivial forms.
Yeah. And if the vehicle has to be SpongeBob SquarePants, so be it.
Yeah, I think the vehicle has to be SpongeBob SquarePants. That's the thing, right? So, yeah.
Well, Dr. Sheila Bock, thanks so much for joining us on CityCast Las Vegas.
Thank you. This has been so fun.
That's all for today here on CityCast Las Vegas. If you enjoyed the show, you know the drill. You tell your friends, you rate the show, you leave us reviews that you know we're going to read, and you subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Till then, stay lucky.
One of my favorite caps that I've seen, it was from a graduate, I believe at Western Kentucky University. A colleague of mine sent a picture of it, and it just had this ripped piece of lined paper, right? That was, like taped on, and it was, extending beyond the lines of the cap. And in just a Sharpie, crudely written, it said "last minute," like everything else in college, right? And this was going to be, it was.
That took me half a second, but yeah, that's pretty good. That's a good one.